Hey everyone, on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, we've got Lia Fey back on the show to talk about working with and communicating with CISOs. Now, CISOs are in a real kind of no-muss, high-pressure position within their given organizations, right? And these individuals, they have to not only deal with the C-suite, but they have to deal with end users as well. And anything that we as technology professionals can do to help make their lives easier not only helps them be successful, but it helps the organization as a whole be successful. So we're going to be talking about tips and tricks for working with CISOs and lots more coming up on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Well, hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornetsecurity. As always, I'm your host, Andy Seroch, and we've got Lia Fey back on the program today. How's it going?
Fine, and you?
Doing good, doing good. Hey, it's great to have you back, Lia. You know, the last time you were on the show, we had a great discussion about security awareness services, if I'm remembering correctly. And, one thing that we talked about in that episode quite a lot is a mention of CISOs kept coming up throughout that conversation, right? Because when we talk about security awareness services, again, for those that haven't seen that episode, I'll be sure to include that in the show notes below. But when we talk about security awareness services, the CISO is usually quite intimately involved with that process, right? So I think that's why CISOs kept coming up in that conversation, which then kind of led to a discussion where you and I were talking, after the fact, like, hey, maybe we should do an episode about, CISOs in general, right? Like, why is their role so unique? What kind of challenges do they have to deal with? Tips and tricks for effectively working with and communicating with CISOs, because I know you, Lia, have spent a lot of time working with CISOs over the last couple of years, if I remember correctly, right?
Right. It's
Gotcha.
my daily business.
Right, exactly. And I guess that's a nice segue into, maybe a quick introduction of you. Just kind of let our users, our listeners who maybe haven't seen that first episode with you, can you give us a quick rundown of who you are and what you do for the organization?
Hello, I am Lia Fey. I am team lead at Customer Success Management at Hornetsecurity, and I help, or we help CISOs to go through an awareness training, awareness campaign, because awareness is more than just phishing. Awareness is a full theme of really much content, and we help CISOs to communicate, to plan, to do, and to be, I don't know the word, effective.
Yes, there we go. All right, so it's safe to say you work with CISOs on a regular basis, like we mentioned, so every day. So I guess where I want to start this discussion is, for those that maybe aren't aware, maybe you're new to the tech space, CISO stands for Chief Information Security Officer, right? And they're kind of in a really unique spot, right, Lia? Because when I look at the traditional IT roles inside of any organization, you've got your CIO, or maybe their title is IT director. I kind of see those two titles kind of being interchangeable. In your larger organizations, you'll also have a dedicated compliance officer as well. And what I've found in my experience, and maybe you can confirm this in your case as well, they seem to have a foot in both of those worlds, right? They kind of have to walk that line between both, and they have IT requirements, they have governance requirements, they have legal requirements and security requirements. So, I mean, really, it's kind of an interesting spot to be in. Did I miss anything there? I think I covered it all.
The employees.
Yes, that too. They're in charge of the overall security of the organization, I think, is basically what it comes down to, right? And I mean, in your conversations with CISOs, I mean, I guess it might be a good spot to start for somebody, again, that works with CISOs on a daily basis. What are your initial impressions of CISOs? I mean, I've known a few myself and work with a couple, but not to the level that you do.
There are different types of CISOs. the one with budget and the one without. This is the
True.
really important point. And then there are CISOs, they are more technical, and CISOs, they can communicate. The technical CISOs need more help by communication to the employees, to the management, and the other side, they need more help with the technical problems.
Right. That makes sense. Just like any organization, you got people of varying degrees of skill set, depending on maybe what they were before they were a CISO, right? But I think the one thing that is kind of universal, and you mentioned this a little bit already, is the fact that they're kind of sandwiched between end users and the C-suite, right? So obviously you have all of this stuff that the C-suite wants done and wants taken care of, and these are the directives from the leadership team. But then you got these end users, all with varying degrees of skill sets. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what your experience has been helping CISOs through that particular process?
I think no matter how a CISO is going his way, he can't do it right for everybody.
Right.
Anybody is every time, why do we do like this? Or why does it cost like this? So they need to hold the line between the employees, between the communication, between what do they want to have, what do they like, where are they scared, and what do they need to know. And then the C-level, they are more looking on numbers, on what does it cost, how is our security level, how can we measure it. And one CISO told me he goes higher and higher in the reporting line, and the highest just need traffic lights, green, yellow, or red. No numbers, no more information, just are we green, red, or yellow? It is not easy for a CISO to find the right words, the right theming for awareness training. Somebody don't like it every time.
It really puts them into an interesting position, right? Because they've got different knowledge levels that they have to communicate, different skill levels that they have to work with. And really, when you look at their position in general, it's high pressure, because if they mess up or someone on their team messes up, I mean, you're talking potentially, absolute worst case scenarios. So a major security issue occur, you're talking about the business going under at the absolute worst case, right? So really high pressure, and they don't have any time for nonsense, right? They need what they need when they need it, and in a very concise, effective manner. So I think that's a good kind of starting point, knowing and understanding CISOs. Let's talk a little bit about their responsibilities now. We've talked about it a little bit already. One of the things that we mentioned was the fact that they are responsible for the overall security of an organization, right? And I think about all the different moving parts that are involved there, right? Your traditional security infrastructure, firewalls, switches, routing, EDR solutions. If you're a larger organization, maybe you have a SIM or your own security operations center on staff. I mean, depending on the size of your organization, right, there's a lot of different things that come into play there. Or, more specific to your conversations, Lia, that would be your security awareness training, right? And the security awareness services. So they have a lot to keep an eye on there, right? I guess, again, your conversations have been more specific to the security awareness services, but I gotta imagine this causes a lot of stress for CISOs, right? I mean, I can only imagine some of the conversations you've had.
IT security is like a clockwork. You need the technical part, you need the awareness part, you need the compliance part, you need GDPR and other organizations for saving the employees. And it's like a clockwork. You need to have a look on the whole thing to choose what you need to do next. And this is the really hard point, because if there's one clock wheel in the wrong direction, nothing works.
It's very true. That's very true. And one thing you mentioned there really kind of stands out to me, especially being based here in the US, and that is compliance. And I mean, so often the full burden, and it shouldn't be this way, but so often I see the full burden of compliance fall onto the shoulders of IT. And in the case of an organization that has a CISO, usually that falls onto the CISO themselves, right? And I mean, granted, a lot of controls in most compliance regulations do have an IT component, but it's not all IT related, right? You've got process, you've got some people regulations, and there's a lot of stuff that comes into compliance. I know there in the EU, you guys have GDPR to worry about. Over here in the States, we've got HIPAA, SOX, PCI, what's the DoD one? ITAR and CMMC. A lot of acronyms there. But I mean, even with I've seen even with organizations that have a dedicated compliance officer alongside the CISO, they're still in a situation where compliance is like a daily word that they use, right? I mean, that's probably what you've seen too, correct?
I have the feeling that compliance, everything we don't know where we can put it is compliance.
Right. If it doesn't fit neatly into a different any other box, it's got to be compliance related, right? And
right.
In your conversations, maybe you've seen this too, but I know I've seen just in my own circles in the community that it used to be years ago, there was a very small subset of organizations that had to worry about things like compliance, right? You had maybe the financial industry and anything to do with defense, and that was about it. Now it's like I can't talk with any organization these days that don't have some sort of compliance regulation. So I think the number of CISOs that are having to deal with compliance on a regular basis is a much larger percentage now than it used to be. So I think another area that I've seen CISOs kind of get pulled into on a regular basis is those legal conversations, right? So either an incident occurs or maybe they're being asked to retrieve information on a potential insider threat or something like that. Any stories or any insight that you've seen on the kind of the legal side of the CISO conversations you've had?
Just have a look at our CISO. Last week, I got an email from him with information about whistleblowing and legal part of this. Or before a month or two, there was an email with information about how to use GDPR or open AI and why we can't use it in a business contact because of legal problems and high. If you do something you don't have to do, and then you get a money.
Oh, a fine. Yep, a fine.
Yeah.
Correct. That's a good point. I mean, just that's another responsibility on their list, right? Just trying to keep up with all that stuff. I think back to the whistleblowing email. That was just because it's a checkbox that has to be checked for European law. That organizations are required to have a mechanism to where employees can notify, if they see something happening that shouldn't be happening, right? And so it's these types of things that they have to keep in mind to not only make sure their company is protected, but also keep up on it on a regular basis too, right? I mean, that stuff changes all the time. I'll pick on HIPAA, the healthcare regulations here in the US. I feel like HIPAA changes on a weekly basis. Now, maybe that's just my perception because I don't live in HIPAA every single day, but it just feels like it's always evolving, right? And so that's another thing to add to their list. And before we move into kind of the tips and tricks section of our conversation today, in working with CISOs, we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but the one other area I see CISOs getting involved in on a regular basis is breach and incident management. Maybe they're not the tech person that's in the trenches actually doing the breach and incident remediation and discovery process, but they're at least managing that, right? And then having to report that up to the higher level leadership in the organization. So, well, knowing all of the stuff that they have to kind of keep their hands wrapped around, I know that you work with CISOs on a regular basis, like we've talked about. I guess what I think would be really valuable for our listeners, Lia, is, in a general sense, what's the most effective way in communicating with CISOs? So I think about, what type of information are they looking for? Just in practical terms of communication, what should your communication be like with them? Can you kind of give us some knowledge and insights and maybe some stories if you've got any in the memory bank there?
The best way is if they get snackable content. It is nice to eat and not so long to read, because there are studies that more than 85% of emails are not read it from the top to the bottom. Just
Right.
Some words. Okay, I know what I need to do, but the rest is away because I have no time. And this is why CISOs need a short communication on point.
I'm guilty of that as well, too. I'll pick out this paragraph in the email and move on. Yes, I get it.
Everybody, because we in Germany, we write emails on more than one side. But in the first step, it was a communication tool for quick communication, like a chat. But we make it like a post office with, dear Mr. President, kind regards. Yeah, it is too much. And you can't have everything in your head, because it's really too much if the information are on more than one side. So when I write longer emails, I make in the first part a bullet point list, which are the points of this email. So and I make the FAT on every point, so they can look, okay, now I need this. I can see the information is there. And this is how I make sure that they don't miss anything. Also, they need information they can share without much work. I have one CISO, he asked me if we have a security report for which are phishing attacks at the moment, which is the new wave of phishing mails. At the moment there is a breach on any company, and they take the emails and answer you. And then you think, okay, I wrote with the sender last week maybe, then you got the problem. This is at the moment a wave. One wave, it hits us too. And we have no problem, because we found it nearly at the moment and informed everybody. But this is the CISOs too. If he knows, okay, here's this breach at the moment, really hard or dangerous, then I need to warn my people. And for this, he needs snackable content.
Right. Not just snackable content to the point to where he can or she can digest it quickly, but like you said, be able to communicate that out to who they need to communicate it out to. So the one thing I think of is a couple weeks back, we had a pretty nasty Outlook vulnerability, right? That amounted to a 0-click exploit. Had to do with I never knew this previously, but apparently at one point in time in Outlook, you had the ability of when you sent a calendar request, you could embed a custom audio file for the reminder sound on the recipient's end. Like, don't get me started on why. I can't even imagine what the intended use case was for that years back when it was created. But when I think about that vulnerability specifically, if I'm the security professional reporting this vulnerability to my CISO, I'm thinking like, okay, the CISO doesn't need to know what I just explained. They don't need to know what the vulnerability is. They need to know what's the potential damage, and two, what's the mitigation or fix, right? And so very quick to the point.
How to warn my employees.
Right.
In a way they understand and they like to read. I have one customer, he makes comics. Small comics for every week, content for the customers. You need to find the way they listen to you.
Right. I think that's important, right? Because, you know, if you go out to your end users with a description like I just gave, like, oh, well, you know, this vulnerability uses a SMB to siphon off the user's NTLM hash v2. I mean, if you go out with that type of stuff, you know, the end users, there's no way they're going to be listening to it, right? So, yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. You know, so we talked about effective communication strategies. I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is CISOs have to look out for their organization, right? But they also have to solve business problems too. And can you give me some examples of how, you know, you would help with that process in terms of communicating and working with CISOs?
First, I listen. Sometimes CISOs just need someone to talk to who understands what the problem is. Because a CISO is also human with feelings and in a really hard position. And after I listened, I know what this CISO needs. It is not every CISO needs this or every CISO needs that. It is to listen to them. What do they need at the moment? And then I have a look that they get it, or I write it for them. I can ask, what is the reporting line at your house? On which time you need to report? Does you need it every 3 months, every 6 months, one time a year? And then I can do it like this. I know he needs on the 1st of June a report. He has it.
Right. Right. I mean, it's just about trying to make their lives easier at the end of the day, because, you know, you want to help them be successful so your organization can be successful. Because if the CISO's not successful, well, chances are some bad things are happening, right?
Yeah, and that the CISO can just be successful as the employees, because he is the puppet man, but the employees need to pay attention. They need to hear. They need to understand. And this is, I think, the effective way to understand how do I need to communicate to get the most impact at my employees.
Right. That's good advice. Good advice. All right. Well, I know we talked a lot about CISOs today, and I know they're time strapped, and I know most security professionals are time strapped. So it's probably a good spot to leave it for today. I know we're just about out of time, but I guess, is there any last minute items that maybe we've left out? I think we covered everything. At least that's on my list. Anything I'm missing, Lia?
No, just the important thing in the job of a CISO is to stay human. You work with humans, you work with security, but you work with humans. And if you stay human, you touch them, and then they help you.
I really like that because it's so often, at least on the security side and especially the technical side, it becomes more about the technology and less about the human process, right? I think that's fantastic advice. So, well, Lia, with that, I want to say thanks for taking the time to come share your knowledge and insight and your experiences with CISO. It's good having you on the show. We'll be sure to have you back for a future episode. It's always good having you.
You're welcome.
Yes, definitely. And those of you watching, thanks for tuning into the show today. If you found this episode valuable or helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We are available on YouTube and every other major podcasting platform as well. If you would like to have a little bit more information on security awareness services, I know we mentioned that a couple of times throughout the episode today. I'll be sure to include a link to that below the show notes as well, too, in case you're interested in that. Other than that, have a good day. We hope to see you again for a future episode of the podcast, and stay safe out there. Thanks for watching.
Have a nice day.